The holographic archives of the Interstellar University Research Center glimmered with an ethereal blue light, casting long shadows across the Xenohistory Research Lab. Zara Killith adjusted the sensory tendrils along her neural interface, her four eyes narrowing with intense concentration. Each of her translucent appendages moved with calculated precision across the data interface, triggering security protocols that most researchers would never dare to challenge. Around her, the lab hummed with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. Mox, her Silurian colleague, stood nearby, his crystalline skin reflecting fragments of light like a living prism. His body was perfectly still, but his internal molecular structure constantly shifted, processing data at speeds most organic beings could never comprehend. Tren, the third member of their research team, leaned against an anti-gravity support, his multi-jointed frame creating intricate shadows on the lab's curved walls. Where Mox was methodical and Zara was driven, Tren brought a rebellious spirit that had become crucial to their unauthorized research project. Another firewall, Zara muttered, her primary eyes focused on the holographic display while her secondary eyes scanned potential backup access points. The system protecting information about humans was unlike anything they had encountered in their years of research. It wasn't just a technological barrier. It felt almost sentient in its complexity. Mox's voice came in a precise, modulated tone. The encryption patterns suggest multiple layers of deliberate information suppression. This goes beyond standard classified documentation. Tren chuckled, a sound that resembled crackling energy more than traditional laughter. Someone really doesn't want us to know about humans. Which, of course, only made them more determined. The university's Xenohistory department had long treated humans as an academic curiosity. Minimal information existed in public archives, just enough to confirm their existence, but nothing substantive. Most galactic species knew humans as a relatively young species that had somehow achieved interstellar travel in a remarkably short time. But the details, those remained frustratingly obscure. Zara's research had begun as a standard cinesociological investigation. What started as a routine academic exploration had transformed into an obsessive quest to understand the species that seemed to defy every standard classification in the galactic database. A breakthrough came unexpectedly. A microsecond-long data fragment slipped through the security protocols, a ghost of information that most researchers would have missed. But Zara's specialized neural implants caught it, a reference to something called the human intervention. The fragment was tantalizing, brief, incomplete, but it suggested something extraordinary had happened, something that had fundamentally altered galactic political structures. "Look at this," Zara called to her colleagues, expanding the microscopic data fragment into a larger holographic display. Mox's analytical systems began processing immediately. Temporal markers indicate this event occurred approximately 127 standard galactic cycles ago. But the context is deliberately obscured. Tren moved closer, his sensory appendages extending to examine the data. An entire species doesn't just get written out of galactic history without a significant reason. The research team knew they were treading into dangerous academic territory. Unauthorized access to restricted archives could mean immediate academic suspension, or worse. The Interstellar University maintained strict protocols about research boundaries, and their current investigation was pushing every possible limit. But something about humans called to them. A species that seemed to emerge from a relatively insignificant planet, yet had somehow captured the collective imagination of multiple advanced civilizations. A species that appeared in fragments, in whispers, in carefully controlled narratives that seemed to hint at something far more complex. Zara's primary eyes locked onto the data fragment. Her secondary eyes continued scanning potential access routes. Something was hidden here, something important. And they were going to find out exactly what it was. "Prepare for a deep-level data extraction," she instructed her teammates. "Whatever is hidden about humans, we're going to uncover it." The lab's ambient temperature seemed to drop several degrees. The holographic displays flickered. Something was listening. Something was watching. and their investigation was just beginning. The university's central data repository looked deceptively peaceful. Massive holographic storage arrays stretched across multiple chambers, each column pulsing with soft, controlled light. Mox approached the central access terminal, his crystalline body refracting the ambient illumination into 1,000 microscopic rainbows. "The data patterns are extraordinary," he murmured, more to himself than to his colleagues. Intricate algorithms danced across his neural networks, probing the seemingly impenetrable walls of information about humans. Zara watched intently, her 4 eyes moving in different directions, 2 scanning the physical environment, 2 focused on the digital landscape Mox was navigating. Tren positioned himself near the chamber's security interface, ready to create a momentary distraction if needed. Suddenly, a breakthrough. A tiny fracture appeared in the data wall, so small that most researchers would have missed it entirely. Mox's specialized sensory systems detected a microsecond-long data stream that didn't match any standard galactic communication protocols. "Got something," Mox announced, his voice a precise blend of excitement and analytical calm. The fragment was unlike anything they had seen before. Mathematical models that typically predicted conflict resolution showed complete breakdown when applied to this particular data set. Standard interaction matrices simply failed to compute. Zara leaned closer to the holographic display. The data fragment showed a series of conflict scenarios: planetary disputes, resource competitions, territorial disagreements. In each scenario, the human involvement resulted in outcomes that defied conventional diplomatic understanding. One particular incident caught their attention. A conflict between 2 neighboring planetary systems had been on the brink of a devastating war. Traditional galactic peacekeeping forces had attempted intervention multiple times, each attempt ending in failure. Then, somehow, humans became involved. The resolution was nothing short of revolutionary. Instead of military intervention or diplomatic negotiation, the humans had apparently transformed the entire conflict into a collaborative research project. The 2 warring planetary systems, which had been prepared to destroy each other, suddenly found themselves working together on a joint scientific endeavor. "This doesn't make sense," Tren muttered, his multi-jointed frame shifting with nervous energy. "No species approaches conflict resolution like this." Mox's analytical systems worked overtime. The mathematical probability of such an outcome is less than 0.0000003%. And yet, here is documented proof. The deeper they dug, the more bizarre the patterns became. Humans seemed to possess an almost intuitive ability to understand the underlying motivations of conflicting parties. Where other species saw insurmountable differences, humans appeared to see opportunities for connection. A recovered communication log provided further intrigue. It was a diplomatic transmission, partially corrupted but still readable. The language was unlike standard galactic communication protocols, less formal, more adaptive, filled with what seemed like intentional ambiguity that somehow made perfect sense. "Look at this linguistic structure," Zora pointed out. The communication didn't just negotiate, it reframed the entire context of the conflict. Tren's research network came through with additional fragments. Whispers of a diplomatic mission, where humans transformed a potential interstellar conflict into a collaborative research project. Each piece of information was like a puzzle piece that refused to fit into any existing understanding of conflict resolution. The university's standard sinosociological models simply broke down when applied to human interaction patterns. Their approach to conflict was so fundamentally different that it challenged everything known about interspecies communication. "We're missing something," Zara said, her voice a mixture of frustration and growing excitement. "Something fundamental about how humans perceive conflict." Mox's crystalline body pulsed with processed information. The data suggests they don't see conflict as a problem to be won, but as a challenge to be solved collaboratively. As the research team continued their investigation, the mystery of humans grew deeper. Each discovered fragment raised more questions than answers. Why would a species approach conflict in such an unconventional manner? What evolutionary or cultural factors could produce such a dramatically different approach to resolution? The holographic displays continued to flicker, hinting at deeper layers of information yet to be uncovered. Something extraordinary was hidden within these data fragments, something that could potentially reshape the entire understanding of interstellar diplomacy. And they were just beginning to scratch the surface. The information brokers' establishment occupied a liminal space between legal and illegal, existing in the complex shadows of galactic information networks. Tren moved with practiced ease through the crowded marketplace, his multi-jointed frame blending seamlessly with the diverse array of beings trading secrets. Xenomarket 7 was a labyrinth of information and artifacts, where data was as valuable a currency as any physical credit. Holographic displays flickered with forbidden knowledge, while traders from 100 different species negotiated in hushed, encrypted languages. Tren's contact was a legend among information brokers, a Nexian data smuggler known only as Whisper. Her reputation for obtaining impossible information was matched only by her ability to disappear without a trace. The meeting place was a small alcove tucked between a quantum data exchange and a rare artifact merchant. Holographic camouflage rippled around the space, creating multiple false reflections that would confuse any potential surveillance. "I hope you understand the risk," Whisper said, her form shifting between multiple holographic representations. One moment she appeared as a tall, willowy creature with iridescent skin, the next as a compact, mechanical being with intricate data ports. Tren placed a collection of rare Xen artifacts on the table, payment for information about humans. Each artifact was a carefully curated piece, a quantum-locked memory crystal from the dying worlds of the Centauri Reach, a resonance frequency modulator from the deep space mining colonies, a preserved biological interface from a species long extinct. Whisper's eyes, real or holographic, seemed to calculate the value of each item with microscopic precision. "Humans," she finally spoke, her voice a low, modulated sound that seemed to vibrate between multiple communication frequencies. "Not many are willing to ask questions about them." A data crystal materialized between them. Unlike standard information storage devices, this one pulsed with an organic rhythm, as if the information inside was somehow alive. "This goes beyond simple diplomatic records," Whisper warned. "What you're seeking could destabilize entire political structures." Tren's appendages moved with careful anticipation. The data crystal contained fragments of communications, mission reports, and personal logs that had been carefully hidden from standard galactic archives. The first fragment detailed a humanitarian mission to a conflict zone. Instead of traditional peacekeeping approaches, the human team had spent weeks understanding the cultural, economic, and social dynamics that led to the conflict. They didn't just bring resources, they'd brought understanding. Another fragment showed a diplomatic negotiation where human representatives seemingly ignored standard protocol. They engaged with local leaders on a personal level, understanding individual motivations, cultural nuances, and underlying psychological dynamics that traditional diplomatic approaches missed entirely. One particular log caught Tren's attention. A human diplomat's personal notes revealed an approach to conflict that was almost philosophical in its complexity. They didn't see different groups as opponents, but as potential collaborators facing a shared challenge. "They don't solve problems," Whisper commented, observing Tren's reaction. "They transform the very nature of the problem." The data revealed a pattern that defied conventional understanding. Humans approached conflicts with a combination of empathy, creativity, and strategic thinking that seemed to rewrite the fundamental rules of interaction. A recovered communication showed a human team turning a potential resource conflict into a joint research project. Where other species saw limited resources and competition, humans saw an opportunity for collaborative innovation. "Why are they so different?" Tren asked, more to himself than to Whisper. The broker's holographic form flickered. "Some say it's their evolutionary history, a species that survived by adapting, by understanding, by finding connections where others saw only divisions." As the data unfolded, a more complex picture of humans emerged. They weren't just problem solvers. They were problem transformers. Their approach to conflict was less about winning and more about creating new possibilities. Trend knew this information would change everything. The research team's investigation was uncovering something far more significant than a simple historical record. Humans represented something revolutionary, a fundamentally different way of understanding interaction, conflict, and collaboration. The data crystal pulsed between them, holding secrets that could reshape galactic understanding. The university's Advanced Psychological Research Center was a marvel of interstellar technology. Holographic interfaces danced with complex neural patterns, mapping the intricate psychological landscapes of hundreds of known species. Zara stood at the central analysis platform, her four eyes moving independently as she processed the accumulated data about humans. Mox's computational systems had been working overtime, analyzing every fragment of information they had collected. The simulation chamber around them hummed with potential, its walls capable of reconstructing entire complex scenarios with microscopic precision. "Prepare the comprehensive psychological analysis protocol," Zara instructed, her voice steady but charged with anticipation. The chamber came alive. Holographic representations of multiple conflict scenarios began to materialize: planetary disputes, resource competitions, cultural misunderstandings. Each scenario would be tested against human intervention strategies. The first simulation showed a classic territorial dispute between two neighboring planetary systems. Traditional galactic peacekeeping approaches had failed repeatedly. Standard diplomatic protocols suggested military intervention or resource redistribution. The human approach was radically different. Instead of approaching the conflict with predetermined solutions, the human team spent weeks understanding the underlying cultural, economic, and psychological dynamics. They didn't just collect data. They built genuine connections. Mox's analytical systems tracked every micro-interaction. The humans identified the core anxieties driving the conflict. One system feared economic collapse. The other feared cultural extinction. Traditional approaches would have addressed these as separate, competing concerns. Humans saw them as interconnected challenges. The simulation showed human representatives facilitating conversations that went beyond typical diplomatic exchanges. They helped both parties realize their shared vulnerabilities. They transformed a potential war into a collaborative economic and cultural exchange program. "Observe the psychological transformation," Mox commented, his crystalline body pulsing with processed information. "They're not solving the problem. They're redefining the entire concept of the problem." Another scenario emerged: a complex multi-species resource conflict that had defied resolution for generations. Previous attempts had resulted in minimal progress and increased tensions. The human approach was almost counterintuitive. They didn't focus on the resources themselves, but on the underlying social and psychological needs driving the conflict. They discovered that the conflict wasn't truly about resources. It was about recognition, cultural dignity, and a sense of collective security. By addressing these deeper psychological needs, they created a solution that went far beyond traditional resource allocation. Zara watched in fascination. The humans seemed to possess an almost intuitive understanding of complex social dynamics. Where other species saw barriers, humans saw opportunities for connection. "Their empathy is not a weakness," she murmured. "It's a sophisticated strategic approach." The simulation chamber continued to reveal extraordinary insights. Humans didn't just understand individual psychological motivations. They could map complex social interactions with remarkable precision. One particularly striking example showed a human team resolving a cultural misunderstanding that had existed for centuries. They didn't use force or traditional diplomatic pressure. Instead, they created collaborative platforms that allowed different cultural groups to share their narratives, fears, and aspirations. Mox's analytical systems struggled to compute the complexity. "Traditional conflict resolution models cannot explain this approach," he said. "It defies standard mathematical prediction." The research team realized they were looking at something revolutionary. Humans approached conflict resolution as a creative process of mutual understanding. They didn't see differences as obstacles, but as opportunities for innovative solutions. Their psychological approach was adaptive, empathetic, and fundamentally transformative. They could navigate complex social landscapes with a flexibility that seemed almost magical to other species. "We're witnessing a completely different paradigm of interaction," Zara said, her voice a mixture of academic excitement and profound respect. The simulation chamber pulsed with captured moments of human intervention. Each scenario told the same story, a species that could turn potential conflicts into opportunities for collaborative growth. As the holographic displays continued to dance with complex psychological patterns, one thing became clear. Humans represented a fundamentally different approach to understanding collective challenges, and they were just beginning to uncover the full depth of this extraordinary capability. The encrypted file was unlike anything they had encountered before. Layers of quantum encrypted security surrounded a data core that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Mox's computational systems worked with surgical precision, each algorithm carefully designed to crack the most sophisticated security protocols in the galactic network. Tren watched from the side, his multi-jointed frame tense with anticipation. Zara's four eyes moved in different directions, two scanning the physical environment, two focused on the digital landscape unfolding before them. Breaking through the final encryption layer, Mox announced, his crystalline body reflecting fractals of light that seemed to dance with the incoming data. A warning flashed, multiple security clearance levels being bypassed simultaneously. This was no ordinary classified document. This was something far more significant. The first fragments of data revealed a top-secret experiment conducted by the Galactic Diplomatic Coordination Council. Its official designation was Project Horizon, but the internal documents told a different story. This was a comprehensive study of human intervention strategies across multiple conflict scenarios. The experiment had been meticulously designed. 12 different interstellar conflicts were selected, each with unique cultural, economic, and territorial complexities. Traditional peacekeeping forces had failed in these scenarios. Diplomatic negotiations had reached complete deadlock. Then the humans were introduced. Each scenario unfolded with increasingly surprising results. In the Orion territorial dispute, humans arrived at a resource-constrained region where 3 different species had been locked in a generations-long conflict. Traditional approaches had resulted in nothing but increased tensions and occasional violent skirmishes. The human team did something unprecedented. Instead of presenting solutions, they first spent weeks simply listening. They engaged with community leaders, workers, scientists, and ordinary citizens from all 3 species. They didn't just collect data. They built genuine connections. The resolution was nothing short of revolutionary. The humans helped the competing species design a collaborative research initiative that transformed the contested resources into a shared scientific opportunity. What had been a potential war zone became a groundbreaking multinational research center. Another scenario involved the complex cultural tensions in the Sigma Quadrant. Multiple species with deeply ingrained historical conflicts have been unable to find common ground. Diplomatic missions had failed repeatedly. The human approach was radically different. They created interactive platforms that allowed different cultural groups to share their narratives, fears, and aspirations. They didn't try to force agreement. They facilitated understanding. Mox's analytical systems struggled to process the complexity. Traditional conflict resolution models cannot explain this approach, he muttered, his computational processes working overtime. The most striking aspect was the human's ability to identify underlying psychological motivations. They didn't see conflicts as competitions to be won, but as complex social challenges to be understood and transformed. In the Beta Cluster resource allocation conflict, humans discovered that the tension wasn't truly about resources. It was about cultural recognition, historical trauma, and collective identity. By addressing these deeper needs, they created solutions that went far beyond traditional diplomatic approaches. The experiment's final report was both fascinating and deeply troubling for the Galactic Coordination Council. Humans had a 97.3% success rate in transforming potential conflicts into collaborative opportunities. Traditional peacekeeping approaches had less than 12% effectiveness. "This changes everything," Zara whispered, her 4 eyes wide with understanding. The classified experiment revealed something profound. Humans possessed an extraordinary ability to navigate complex social landscapes. They could see connections where others saw only divisions. They transformed conflicts by helping different groups recognize their shared humanity, or in this case, their shared sentience. Trend's research network began processing the implications. "They're not just solving problems," he said. "They're redefining the entire concept of conflict resolution." As the final layers of encryption fell away, the research team realized they were looking at something revolutionary. Humans represented a fundamentally different approach to understanding collective challenges. The universe, it seemed, was about to change. The Galactic Council chamber was a marvel of architectural engineering. Suspended high above the central planet of the unified stellar confederation, the chamber seemed to float in space. Holographic interfaces wrapped around crystalline walls, representing the collective presence of hundreds of different species. Zara stood at the central presentation platform, her 4 eyes moving with calculated precision. Mox's crystalline body hummed with processed data, while Trend's multi-jointed frame seemed to vibrate with nervous energy. Their research presentation would challenge everything the Council believed about conflict resolution. The chamber fell silent as Zara began. Holographic displays materialized, showing the intricate details of human intervention strategies. Each image told a story of transformation. Conflicts dissolved, connections formed, collaborative opportunities created where only division existed before. The first counselors to react were the arch-diplomats of the Centauri Concordance. Their translucent bodies shifted with visible agitation. These findings challenge fundamental diplomatic protocols, one of them stated, their voice a complex harmonics of multiple communication frequencies. Mox stepped forward, his analytical systems preparing to defend their research. Traditional conflict resolution models have less than 12% effectiveness, he presented. Human intervention strategies demonstrate a 97.3% success rate in transforming potential conflicts. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated responses. Some counselors looked fascinated. Others appeared terrified. The representative from the Deep Space Territorial Alignment leaned forward. "If what you're suggesting is true, this could completely destabilize existing political structures." Zara's response was calm and precise. "That is precisely the point. Our research suggests that humans don't just resolve conflicts. They fundamentally reimagine the nature of interaction." Holographic simulations continued to dance around them. Each scenario showed humans doing something extraordinary. They didn't approach conflicts with predetermined solutions. They created platforms for mutual understanding. The Quantum Diplomatic Corps representative challenged them directly. "How can a single species develop such a unique approach to conflict resolution?" Trend stepped forward, his research networks activating. "It's not a strategy. It's a fundamental way of perceiving collective challenges. Humans see connections where others see barriers." The most dramatic reaction came from the elder species, ancient civilizations that had guided galactic diplomacy for millennia. Their representatives' form shifted between multiple dimensional representations, a sign of deep contemplation. "This threatens everything." The elder representative finally spoke. "Our entire diplomatic infrastructure is built on managing conflicts, not resolving them." Zara's presentation reached its critical moment. She revealed the classified experiment documents, showing how humans transformed potential wars into collaborative research initiatives. Resource conflicts became joint scientific endeavors. Cultural tensions became platforms for mutual understanding. The chamber became a battleground of ideology. Some counselors demanded the research be suppressed. Others were captivated by the potential implications. "Humans represent something revolutionary," Zara declared. A species that approaches collective challenges not as competitions to be won, but as opportunities to be understood. The Quantum Diplomatic Corps representative challenged them again. This sounds dangerous. A species that can so fundamentally transform conflict could destabilize entire political systems. Mox's response was precise, or they could help those systems evolve. The debate intensified. Holographic arguments filled the chamber, different species presenting their perspectives. But underneath the complex discussions, a fundamental truth emerged. Humans had discovered something profound, a way of interaction that went beyond traditional diplomatic approaches, a method of resolving conflicts that created more than it destroyed. As the presentation concluded, the chamber was forever changed. The research team had done more than present information. They had introduced a new way of understanding collective challenges. The universe would never be the same. The university's diplomatic reception hall fell silent as Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered. Her arrival was unexpected, the human representative appearing precisely when their research had thrown the galactic diplomatic community into chaos. Zara's 4 eyes tracked every movement. Mox's crystalline body seemed to pulse with anticipation. Tren's multi-jointed frame shifted subtly, preparing for potential revelations. Dr. Rodriguez carried no traditional diplomatic credentials. Her presence was both simple and extraordinary, a walking embodiment of the research they had been investigating. "I believe," she began, her voice carrying with remarkable clarity, "you have some questions about how humans approach conflict." The room remained breathless. The human diplomat was unlike any representative they had encountered. She wore simple research attire, with data interfaces that seemed almost organic in their integration with her personal systems. "Our approach isn't a strategy," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "It's a fundamental way of understanding collective challenges." She activated a holographic display that began showing human historical developments. The presentation revealed something profound. Humans had evolved on a planet of extraordinary diversity and complexity. Their survival had depended not on individual strength, but on collective adaptation. The earliest human societies demonstrated something remarkable. When faced with challenges, they didn't isolate or compete. They collaborated, innovated, and transformed obstacles into opportunities. "We don't see conflicts as competitions," she explained. "We see them as complex systems waiting to be understood." One holographic scenario after another unfolded. Planetary environmental challenges transformed into global collaborative projects. Economic disparities resolved through innovative sharing models. Cultural differences becoming sources of collective strength rather than division. Mox's analytical systems worked overtime, processing the extraordinary information. The human approach defied every standard diplomatic model in the galactic database. Dr. Rodriguez revealed the deeper psychological foundation. Humans possessed an extraordinary ability to practice what they called radical empathy, a capacity to genuinely understand different perspectives, even when those perspectives seemed fundamentally opposed. "We were never banned from galactic conflicts," she said, her statement both simple and revolutionary. "We were contained because our approach threatened existing power structures." The diplomatic reception hall became a crucible of understanding. Traditional galactic representatives struggled to comprehend the implications of her revelation. She shared stories of human interventions that had transformed seemingly impossible situations. A resource conflict between 3 planetary systems became a collaborative research initiative. A cultural misunderstanding that had lasted generations was resolved through mutual storytelling platforms. "Our strength isn't in military might," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "It's in our ability to see connections where others see divisions." The research team watched in amazement. Every piece of their investigation was being confirmed, expanded, transformed. Tren's research networks processed the information with increasing complexity. The human approach was less a diplomatic strategy and more a fundamental way of perceiving collective challenges. Dr. Rodriguez's final revelation was the most profound. Humans didn't just resolve conflicts. They created entirely new possibilities that made the original conflicts irrelevant. "We don't solve problems," she said. "We transform the very nature of the problem." The diplomatic representatives from multiple species sat in stunned silence. Some looked terrified. Others looked inspired. A few looked like their entire understanding of interaction was being fundamentally reconstructed. Zara realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Humans weren't just a species. They were a living demonstration of a revolutionary approach to collective challenges. As Dr. Rodriguez concluded her presentation, the room was forever changed. The galactic understanding of conflict, diplomacy, and collective interaction would never be the same. The universe had just discovered a new way of seeing itself. The aftermath of Dr. Rodriguez's presentation rippled across the galactic community like a transformative wave. Research centers, diplomatic institutions, and cultural exchange platforms began to reconsider everything they understood about conflict and collaboration. Zara, Mox, and Tren found themselves at the center of a revolutionary movement. Their initial research had become a catalyst for a fundamental reimagining of interstellar interactions. The university established a new interdisciplinary research center dedicated to understanding human approach to complex challenges. Scientists, diplomats, and philosophers from hundreds of different species began studying the unique human perspective. One particularly fascinating discovery emerged from the continued research. Humans didn't just solve problems. They created entirely new frameworks of understanding that made existing conflicts obsolete. A demonstration project in the Sigma Quadrant became a landmark example. 3 planetary systems had been locked in a resource conflict for generations. Traditional diplomatic approaches had failed repeatedly. The human intervention team approached the challenge differently. They didn't focus on the resources themselves. Instead, they helped the competing systems understand their deeper motivations: fear of cultural extinction, concerns about economic stability, generational trauma from previous conflicts. The result was extraordinary. The 3 planetary systems created a collaborative research initiative that transformed the contested resources into a shared scientific opportunity. What had been a potential war zone became a groundbreaking multinational research center. Dr. Rodriguez continued to be a key figure in explaining the human approach. "We don't see barriers," she would often say. "We see bridges waiting to be built." The galactic academic community began to understand that human capabilities went far beyond traditional problem-solving. They possessed an extraordinary ability to see complex systems as opportunities for collective growth. Mox's analytical systems worked tirelessly, documenting the profound implications. The human approach challenged fundamental assumptions about conflict, cooperation, and collective intelligence. Tren's research networks mapped the psychological and cultural foundations of this unique perspective. Humans had evolved on a planet of extraordinary diversity and complexity. Their survival had depended on collaboration, adaptation, and innovative thinking. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps underwent a complete transformation. Traditional conflict resolution models were replaced with more dynamic, adaptive approaches inspired by human strategies. Educational institutions across multiple planetary systems began incorporating human interaction models into their curriculum. Students learned to see conflicts not as competitions to be won, but as complex challenges to be understood and transformed. Zara's research team continued to explore the deeper implications. They discovered that the human approach was more than a diplomatic strategy. It was a fundamental way of perceiving collective challenges. One remarkable case study involved a long-standing cultural misunderstanding between 2 ancient spacefaring civilizations. Previous diplomatic missions had failed for centuries. The human intervention team created a collaborative storytelling platform that allowed both cultures to share their histories, fears, and aspirations. The result was nothing short of miraculous. What had been centuries of mistrust transformed into a deep mutual understanding. The 2 civilizations began collaborative scientific and cultural exchange programs. Dr. Rodriguez explained it as a principle of radical empathy, the ability to genuinely understand different perspectives, even when those perspectives seemed fundamentally opposed. The galactic community slowly began to realize that humans represented something revolutionary. They weren't just another species. They were a living demonstration of a new approach to collective challenges. Political structures began to change. Diplomatic protocols were reimagined. Cultural exchange platforms became more dynamic and meaningful. As the research continued, one fundamental truth became clear. Humans had discovered something profound. A way of interaction that created more than it destroyed. A method of resolving conflicts that transformed the very nature of the challenges themselves. The universe would never be the same. In the university's central research hall, Zara, Mox, and Tren looked at each other. Their initial curiosity had unveiled something extraordinary. They had helped the galaxy understand a fundamentally new way of seeing itself. Some species build walls. Humans build connections.